Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past.
Sophie Vlogs.
I've got 4 books to talk about this week. I'm just going to crack on. I'm going to kick things off with Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. This is my second Bernadine Evaristo. I really loved Girl, Woman, Other, and so when I was deciding which one of her books to pick up next, my friend Charlie over at Charles Heathcote really sung the praises of this one, so I thought I would give it a go. I really enjoyed this book. I find Bernadine Evaristo's work very absorbing. I find it very easy to get sucked in. I do know other people who've had the opposite experience where they find it like really disconnected, but something about it just works for me. This follows 74-year-old Antiguan gentleman Barry. Essentially, for the past 60 years he's been married to his wife, but he's secretly been in love with his best friend the whole time. And this is sort of about Barry deciding whether or not he's going to leave his wife to go be with Morris. I had a really interesting time reading this. There are sort of 2 narrative perspectives in this. Most of the book is from Barry's point of view, and then you do get chapters from his wife's point of view. The style of Carmel's chapters was very similar to the style that Girl, Woman, Other was written in, where it is these sentences that don't have punctuation and everything flows, whereas Barry's perspective adheres to more like linguistical grammar rules and stuff like this. I think what I really liked about this is I really enjoyed the sort of complexity of characterization that we had, because Barry has a lot of opinions that I deeply disagree with. He has all of these like prejudices, which he doesn't view as prejudices, he just views them as like facts. He very much likes to sort of show off like his learning and stuff like this. And so there are definitely moments where he says things and he comes out with things and I'm like, for fuck's sake, Barry. But there are also moments in this where you really get these like unexpected moments of like depth and kindness and that sort of thing. I think what I found so compelling about this is Barry believes that he has acted in the right way throughout his life. He hasn't left his wife to be with the man he loves. He stayed so he can be a father for his family and all this sort of thing. But one process he has to go on throughout this book is realizing that just because you think you're doing the right thing, that is not necessarily the case, and that actually these decisions and these choices that he made have deep ramifications for the other people in his life. They have ramifications for his wife, they have ramifications for his daughters, and he sort of has to go on this journey of like understanding how his actions have affected those people, how his actions have affected Morris, and that sort of thing. And I appreciate narratives that can give me protagonists who are flawed people, because they are people, that I can understand how they are the way that they are, why they act the way that they act, but also see them go on a journey of understanding that maybe their actions have not always had the best consequences and that sort of thing. So I love that sort of like complexity that happens there. I also did find it really moving to read a book about 2 men who have never been able to make their love public. There's a moment in this that really destroyed me where they have their first moment of public affection, where they hold hands in public for the first time ever. And in like Barry's perspective, like he talks about how like he's spent his whole life seeing couples be publicly affectionate and he has never felt that he's able to do that with the man he loves, and that just got me. It's always really interesting to read multiple works by an author and get a sense of like, okay, what are the similarities between these things? How do these things differ? So then like stylistically, stuff like this, like what are like common threads? How are things different? Because from reading descriptions of all of her books, they sound like they're all quite different. So I think that this is going to be an author that is going to be really fun to continue exploring and continue reading more of their work. If you have a recommendation for where I should go next in my Bernadine Evaristo reading experience, I would really appreciate it. I have a couple that are sort of floating around on my radar, but I'm not sure which one to go for yet, so please do give me a shout if you have an idea. After that is a piece of translated fiction. This is Death in Spring by Merce Rodoreda, which is translated from the Catalan by Martha Tennant. I picked this up on the recommendation of my friend Matthew from MCS Books, who is generally my go-to for translated fiction. This was not a bad book. This is just not necessarily the book for me. This was gifted to me, but I asked for it because I was really interested in reading some Catalan literature, because I've never read any literature from Catalan. And particularly I was interested in Merce Rodoreda because I know that she was very important in some of these movements to preserve the Catalan language and culture and that sort of thing. I sort of knew going into this, I had seen reviews that were saying that this is like a metaphor for existing in the Franco regime. I also saw people who were essentially saying, like, don't try and, like, stamp the narrative down too much, like, just go with it. So I did those things. This is set in this village. Our narration is like first-person narration, and I, at the start, was really enjoying it because there were all these really luscious descriptions of nature, of animals, like certain animals like bees and butterflies and stuff like this, like really recur a lot. There are all of these like beautiful, lush, natural descriptions. And then there are all these unsettling things at the edges where you're getting understandings of the structure of this village and some of the things that they do. Very early on, there is an event whereby our main character's father dies, and that was extremely weird. So there were all of these moments of realizing that everything is not as it seems, everything is not as you would expect, and then sort of trying to piece together what is happening. So that in itself was really interesting. I think the writing and also like the translation of the writing is really beautiful. There were some really gorgeous like phrases and ways of putting things and that sort of thing. I think my main thing is that this does get very dark. There is some very gross imagery, and if I had known that it was like that, I probably wouldn't have picked it up, because I just know that I am not a reader who enjoys those things. I have a very visual brain. There is some imagery in this which I really have had to work on, like, getting out of my head. So that's sort of a personal preference thing. I know that for a lot of people that's just going to be really effective and that's not going to bother them. It's just, I really don't like gross things, especially gross things to do with insects. I really am not a fan. So that was a real sort of stumbling block for me personally. I did sort of struggle as this went on a bit, just to sort of get what was happening sometimes, because it does sort of give you things sideways, or it doesn't like give you like straight answers for things. You get to piece together information. I also do know that I think that this was unfinished when she died. This was published after she had passed away, but I believe that this wasn't actually completely finished. So I don't know whether that factors into it as well. So this is one of those ones where I'm like, it was definitely an interesting and challenging read, which are those types of books I always appreciate reading in some ways, because I think it is good to every now and then read things outside of your comfort zone and just like challenge yourself. I think if I had known some of the sort of like gross stuff and stuff like that that was in this, I might not have picked it up necessarily for me. Moving on to something that was just delightful. This is some middle grade. This is Shadowsea by Peter Bunzl, which is the fourth book in the Cogheart Adventures. This one has these really fab, like vibrant green sprayed edges. The Cogheart series is a middle grade series that is sort of, it's set in this world which has mechanical, I can never say it. Set in this world that has mechanicals who are sort of like clockwork robot people, and then also mechanimals who are clockwork robot animals. We follow Lily, who was in an accident when she was a child, and so her heart has actually been replaced with a clockwork heart. She's the only person to have ever had this done. She has a mechanimal called Malkin, who is a little fox. She has her friend, and sort of each time these books explore like different topics. They're set in Victorian times in this society that is all clockwork powered and steam powered, so there's a little bit of like steampunk at the edges. This one was really interesting. As you might be able to guess, it does involve like a submarine plot. They've gone to New York for the new year. They're staying in this hotel. There's this strange professor. There's this boy who may or may not being held hostage that they're trying to help, and like adventures and shenanigans ensue. One thing I love about this series is I think it's really great for the target age audience. It has lots of sort of mixed media in it, so it has sort of like pictures of like newspaper front pages, articles, stuff like that, and I think that's really great for this age range to read. There's always a little like glossary at the back that sort of like has the key terms that are being discussed for whatever topic it is we're exploring. And I think it has some really gorgeous like imagery and that sort of thing. It also really does deal with sort of like family, because Lily has lost her mother, her friend has lost his father. There's sort of like this kind of like navigating of like making your family in the way that works for you and that sort of thing, which I also really like. My one quibble with this one is that actually as it went on, I think it got a little bit darker than I had expected it to be. There's sort of like this kind of zombie plot which like develops, which I really was not expecting. I was fine with it because I'm an adult. I do wonder if some of the younger readers of this might find that quite scary. Again, it's going to depend on individual kids, and I personally had a fun time. I understood the sort of topics it was grappling with, and really it was about like learning to deal with loss and learning to like rebuild yourself and stuff like that. It's just like trapped on a submarine being stalked by zombies is sort of a stress stream of mine. Finally, some non-fiction. I also read She-Wolves by Helen Caster, The Women Who Ruled England Before Elizabeth. This has been on my to-read list for so long. I talked about this in the oldest books on my TBR video, and that is actually what prompted me to pick it up and read it. Essentially, we're looking at 4 women. So we're looking at Empress Matilda, we're looking at Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabella of France, and Margaret of Anjou. And we're looking at them we are looking at them and summarising their lives, but we're also sort of looking at them through the lens of Elizabeth I did not exist in a vacuum. So it's telling you about these women's lives, which I really enjoyed. My favourite bits of this were when she's really looking into like, okay, the nature of women ruling on their own. Some of these women were only really able to engage with their power as queens when they were, for example, acting on behalf of a child. What are these things that we need to legitimise these women's rules? What are the precedents that these people set that then enabled Elizabeth to act in the way that she did? All of these sorts of things. The thing is that I'm into history and I'm into all 4 of these women. So the bits where she's just sort of like summarising what happened, I perfectly enjoyed, but I also sort of kind of knew it all already. So for me, what I found super interesting is when she sort of returned to this thesis concept of looking at like engaging in power, gaining legitimacy for your power, the pitfalls, all of this sort of thing. So I found that sort of like thread that ran throughout this really fabulous. I personally did find this very readable. I can't speak confidently on how readable it is for someone who's not already familiar with the names and the people and the battles and stuff like this, because it is stuff I do know very well at this point. So I find myself struggling to sort of like separate my brain from my knowledge enough to be like, is this accessibly done? I felt like it was all quite clear, but I read a lot of historical stuff, so, you know. I know that this is like the doorway into reading like historical non-fiction for a lot of people, and I definitely would recommend it. I had a really great time with it. Those are all 4 books that I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, please do leave me comments down below if you have any thoughts, if you have read them, anything like that. I would love to hear from you. But otherwise, I hope you're having a super duper lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.